Okay, let's talk about these new CDC Milestone Guidelines. So, the CDC in the last few weeks, along with the American Academy of Pediatrics, put out some new developmental milestone guidelines, basically like a checklist. So the good news is that this is the first time that they've updated these milestones since 2004. So almost 20 years, this is the first time they've been updated. So it seems like great. We're kind of like catching up with the times, and updated information is always great. The other good thing is that the milestones, the way they're written, they're in very parent-friendly language. So it did take out a lot of like erroneous language or language that could be confusing. Like they took out words like, a child may do these, or they may start doing these, or this skill may be emerging. They kind of took out some of that extra language and just said like, this is the milestone in really simple language. So the biggest changes that were made is that almost all of the developmental milestones for every domain have been pushed back. Some of them have been pushed back just by a month or two. Some of them have been pushed back by a much larger number. So for all of the gross motor milestones specifically, most of them have been pushed back 1 to 2 months. So when you're looking at it, it appears that this is a good thing. Like, oh great, we're giving kids longer to reach milestones. We're giving them basically like a better chance to reach these milestones on time. So that's the way it's being presented, and that's the way that they are kind of spinning this to be like a positive change. Like, oh great, like we're advocating for early intervention, and we're advocating for early referrals, and we're giving kids longer to meet these milestones. This is all a great thing. But really, in reality, what is happening is that we are pushing back the milestones, and that means that kids that are susceptible to being behind on milestones, kids who do need extra support, kids who are falling behind in their milestones, they are actually going to be identified later because we've pushed all the milestones back. So for example, rolling used to be listed as a 6-month skill. Well, now it's listed as an 8-month skill. So that means that a kid who's having trouble with rolling, before they would have been identified as needing support at 6 months, and now they're not going to be identified as needing support until 8 months. Now we have gotten into, in the old guidelines, an 8-month-old should be sitting independently, starting to get into sitting, starting to get into hands and knees, maybe even starting to crawl, but now we've pushed it back, so we're focusing 8 months on rolling. So we're kind of just building up to this cascade of kids are going to start falling behind, and they're not going to be identified soon enough, which means they're going to start falling behind in more and more skills. So walking is another example. In the old guidelines, and from my page that I consider typical range of walking to be 12 to 16 months. Well, now the CDC is saying that typical range for meeting walking is 18 months. So whereas before a child that wasn't walking by 16 months would have been identified as needing support and would have been referred to services, and now those kids aren't going to be identified and referred until 18 months. So we're losing precious time. That 2 months from 16 months to 18 months is a huge loss for kids who really are behind and really do need extra support to meet their milestones. They're losing 2 months that they could have been getting intervention and could have been catching up, and they're just going to fall further and further behind. So the other issue is that crawling, the CDC guidelines do not mention a single word about crawling. No hands and knees, no transitioning in and out of hands and knees, no army crawling, no 4-point. They don't even say that, bum scooting and army crawling and hitching are typical, which is what it used to say, which also wasn't correct and was an issue, but now it doesn't even say anything. So that's a problem for me. That's a problem for therapists who are working so hard to educate parents on the importance of crawling, and now they've just taken it completely out. Like omitting skills is just not an option. They've also reduced the number of skills significantly. So they've taken out a lot of those little mini milestones. So they've taken out things like pivoting on your tummy. So just like little things like that, that in themselves, maybe it's not that important that parents be able to track those little tiny milestones, but the little milestones are indicators of what we can expect in the bigger milestones. So if a kiddo is having trouble meeting those mini milestones, that's an indication that they might have trouble meeting those larger milestones and that they do need some kind of support. So in my opinion, it's just irresponsible to take out those smaller milestones because we're only giving parents the large milestones to gauge from, whereas if they were seeing all of the little milestones, they could kind of see the writing on the wall, like, my kid's having trouble with like several of these milestones. Maybe it is a good idea to go get services, versus like, oh, well, it's just one skill that my kid is having trouble with. That's not that big of a deal, when in actuality, it could be a bigger issue than that. Another huge issue that therapists have with these new guidelines is that no developmental experts were consulted for these changes. So if you look at their list of the expert panel that reviewed and approved all of these milestones, it's all pediatricians and people with PhDs. There are no PTs, no OTs, no speech therapists, no early childhood specialists. There are no experts in the field of development that were consulted when these changes were made. So that's just not really a good thing in my opinion. I think that you should be consulting the people who have experience in that field to be able to tell you, like, yes, I think this is a great idea, or you might want to think about this instead. So because all of these milestones have been pushed so far back, and the speech and language milestones have been pushed back significantly, it's actually pretty alarming how far back they've been pushed. Fewer kids are going to qualify for free early intervention services. So every state has a free program where from birth to 3, you can qualify for free government services for PT, for speech, for OT, for all of that stuff. And so because these milestones have been pushed so far back, especially for speech and language, there are going to be so many kids that are going to miss that window of qualifying for those free services, which means they're going to have to go through private insurance or self-pay, paying copays, going to a private clinic, which is fine, but we're missing out on that window of getting to serve them earlier, and which in the long run is going to cost more money, because we know that early intervention is key. We know that the earlier that you refer for services, the shorter amount of time it takes to treat those delays. So if kids are being referred months and months later, they're going to be more behind by the time they're referred, and it's going to take longer to be in therapy to get caught up, which just costs everybody more money in the long run. So I want people to understand that even though this is being framed as a positive change, a positive update, it's going to identify delays sooner, it's going to get kids referred sooner. The reality is that that really isn't what is going to be happening. The reality is that kids are going to be referred later. We are going to see kids that need more therapy services to catch up, and we're going to see kids that are just being missed completely because their delays and their struggles maybe are so mild that they're not caught using this list from the CDC because they've taken out so many skills. So I think it's going to make our job as therapists and as educators and people on this platform who are trying to educate parents, it's kind of made our job a little bit harder because we're kind of fighting against the system. You know, like the things that we are going to be saying are normal, typical development is kind of going to go against what this like higher overarching organization is saying. So I want to encourage you just to kind of dig in a little bit more, pay attention to what the therapists in this space are saying, pay attention to the reasons that we're saying that we don't agree with these changes, and just kind of don't take it at face value. You know, when when people are saying like, oh, these are great changes. Don't just take that just because people are saying that. Kind of look to the experts in that field to see if the changes really are good or not.